Welcome to First Light. I'm Chris Keller. Today we're honored to host Spencer Kuvin, Chief Legal Officer at Gold Law in West Palm Beach, Florida, and one of Florida's board-certified civil trial lawyers. Spencer has become a national voice for survivors of sexual abuse, helping unseal key records, litigate against powerful defendants like Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Cosby, and reshape how personal injury firms approach trauma-informed representation. In our time together, we'll trace Spencer's journey from courtroom strategy to public advocacy, dig into how meaningful transparency actually happens, and pull back the curtain on how a firm handles plaintiffs with compassion and rigor at the same time. Spencer, I want to thank you for joining me today on First Light. And so for those who may not know you, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are?
Sure. Appreciate you having me on today. So Spencer Kuvin, and I work as the Chief Legal Officer at Gold Law in West Palm Beach. Plaintiff lawyer, been doing it now almost 30 years, working on behalf of victims.
We were just talking before we got on about how you got into plaintiff's law, and I thought it was an incredible story that we should have been capturing, and because everybody has kind of a unique path to get
Sure.
to plaintiff's work, and you have an amazing story. So let's go back to that. Let's talk about doing defense work for many years and switching over to the good side. But how did that switch come about?
So I started my career early on. My father was a lawyer. So growing up, it was funny because if you had asked me what I wanted to do for a living, I'd have told you anything but be a lawyer. And that was my standard line. I would always say that no matter what anyone asked me, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? Anything but a lawyer. So I started out in college actually wanting to be a doctor and started pre-med, and I ended up at Florida State University. And I was in the Marching Chiefs for 2 years and met a bunch of friends in the Marching Chiefs. And unfortunately, I probably wasn't the best student because of that, my first 2 years. And my dreams of going to med school kind of ended with organic chemistry. And I had to switch and find something else. So I switched and got a degree in economics because I got B's in economics. So that seemed like the major for me at the time. And then I graduated, but before I did, I was working as a disc jockey at the local radio station, WVFS in Tallahassee. And working as a disc jockey was interesting because you get to develop your voice, right? You're on the air all the time, you're talking all the time. And I had a very particular show. It was called Metal Madness. And I was the V89 vampire on Metal Madness. For those of you that went to FSU back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, that was me. And it was a great job because I got to interview bands. I met the Goo Goo Dolls. I met Testament. I met Metallica. I met Lita Ford. I met Pantera. You name the heavy metal band of that era, and I was there. So I had a blast. And when I graduated, that was my goal. I wanted to be in the music industry more than anything else. So my dad thought I was crazy, which just tickled me to death. So I interviewed and almost got a job in New York working. I had offers to work for Sony Records and Metal Blade Records in New York doing college radio promotions. And unfortunately, this was about 1990, 91-ish. There was a recession in the economy, so they weren't hiring. So they said, look, we want to hire you, but, it's just not the right time. So I said, all right, let me hang out in Tallahassee for a little bit and see how things go. So I did. And I hung out in Tallahassee and I worked for the College of Engineering, and I was videotaping. At the time, it was, the latest tech in the world. You could actually take a class in Tallahassee and they would have cameras and you could watch that in Pensacola and be involved in the class at the same time. And that was like, wow, that's amazing. You can actually, watch a teacher in Tallahassee at the same time. And now it's like, yeah, we got Zoom, right? So I was producing that and doing camera operations for that show, or not show, but those classes, and just waiting around for my opportunity to go to New York. So finally, my dad said to me, he goes, look, all those guys in the record industry, he says, they all have law degrees. He goes, the ones running the music business are lawyers. I half believed him. And he goes, read about it. So I said, all right. So I bought a couple books on the music industry, and sure enough, he was right. they're all lawyers. So I said, you know what? All right. Maybe if I can still do music, I'm good. Right. So he goes, look, take the LSAT, the law school prep exam, and see how you do. And I said, oh, all right, fine. I'll take it. And he goes, well, let me pay for the course because if you're going to take it, you might as well do it the right way. So I said, all right, let's do that. So I did. And I ended up just knocking it out of the park. And it was just like natural. It just came so easy. And I said, this is silly. If this is coming so easy, why don't I at least give it a shot? So he goes, look, apply to law school. See if you get in. He goes, if you get a law degree, you can still work in the record industry. I said, all right, I'll give it a shot. So I applied. I got rejected at every single law school I applied to except one. One law school it took me in. And it was so sad. I got rejected at University of Miami Law. Now, the funny reason why that's sad is my father had gone to University of Miami. So he was a legacy at the law school, but he had gone there because the Korean War had broken out. And the reason he got in there was that his uncle taught insurance law at University of Miami at their law school. And this is back in the, God, I want to say 50s ish. So not only was I a legacy to that law school, but my great uncle had taught there. And they said, no, we're going to take a pass. So, yeah, I ended up going to St. Thomas University and it just came natural. Law was just, it was almost like it was bred into me. It was weird. And that was the genesis and the beginning of my law career.
Oh, man, it's crazy how, somebody has an attorney as well. And same thing. I was like, I'm never going to be an attorney. I don't want to do that. And then, here we are, fast forward and what we're doing. But let's talk about the kind of the going into plaintiff's law. I know you were doing defense for a while there, and what brought you to West Palm Beach? What brought you to plaintiff's work?
So I started doing, as you said, defense work, and I'd gotten my first job after clerking at a firm down in Hollywood, Florida, that actually is still in existence today, and doing defense work. And I eventually took that job, which then led me to Fort Lauderdale doing defense work. It was insurance defense, so large insurance companies, carriers, that kind of thing. And then eventually got a job down in Miami working for a bigger firm doing defense work. But in that job, I was able to kind of transition into a little bit more intellectual type work. So I was doing medical malpractice defense work on behalf of some very large laboratories that are based in Philadelphia. And I did a lot of their regional work. So I was doing primarily dermatopathology. So it's like if you go to a dermatologist and they cut off something and look at it. And I did that for about 5 years working in Miami. And it got to the point where I'll never forget my last case that made me decide I can't do this anymore. I was representing a laboratory and they had misdiagnosed a slide on a little girl who was probably about 12 years old. And the pathologist that looked at it said it was benign. And the little girl ended up, her mole came back. And mom took her back and they looked at the slide and said, you know what, this is malignant melanoma, which back then was almost a death sentence. And it had gone to the point where they wanted to see what the first slide said. So they went back and pulled that. And sure enough, the doctor had missed it. And it was malignant melanoma even before, a year before. But at that point, it was stage 1, which is like 95% curable. And now, a year later, it had gotten to stage 2, which is much more serious. And when I took the slide to the pathologist and said, you know, what happened? He looked at it and he just kind of sat back after he looked at it a couple times and he goes, yep, I missed it. I just hung my head. I mean, I'm like, what do I do? I mean, I'm here supposed to be defending this pathologist in laboratory. And I couldn't. I said, I can't do this anymore. I got to be on the other side of this. I got to be fighting for the people that are hurt. And that's when I made the mental switch. and started looking for a job.
Yeah, so you get a phone call from Bob Montgomery, who's infamous here in Palm Beach County,
Yeah.
and go for the interview. Tell us that interview story.
It was
I think it's
crazy.
hilarious.
So he invites me to come up to the office for an interview, and I coordinated it with a hearing I had up here in West Palm Beach. So I drive up, and I'm in my Toyota 4Runner, probably like 5-year-old truck, and I had just had my son, and he was probably, I want to say, about 10 months old, 11 months old, just under a year. And my wife and I had just bought our first house. And this was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house in Miami Shores down in Miami. And it was a fixer upper, to say the least. This was interesting little house, but it was ours, right? So I drive up here, and Montgomery brings me into the office. The first thing I noticed when I showed up at his office, which was very funny, when you walk through the front door and you get to the front desk of his old office, he had an oil painting of himself behind the desk at the reception desk, and it was this huge oil painting of Montgomery standing there, right? So he invites me back to his office, and he's got this big oak desk. I mean, this thing was probably 8 feet across, 4 feet, deep. And I sit there, and he invites his partner in at the time, who was Rebecca Larson, who has also since passed. And he starts interviewing me, asking me what I did, what I want to do, why I'm coming up there. And I talk to him. And after about, I want to say 30 minutes, 45, it really wasn't that long. It didn't seem like that long. He goes, "You hired." And I'm like, "Okay, can I talk to my wife about this? I gotta." He goes, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." He goes, "You go talk to your wife and see how this all plays out." I'm like, "Okay." And then he kind of sits there in his chair, and he's got this big, cushy leather chair, and he leans back and he pulls open the desk drawer of his office desk. And he reaches in his desk drawer and he pulls out a set of keys, and he just throws them across this oak desk. And he goes, "Here." He goes, "All my lawyers drive Jaguars." He goes, "Here's yours." And I'm, "Oh, whoa. Okay. What do I do with the 4Runner?" And he goes, "I don't care." He goes, "Leave it in my parking lot. It'll be safe."
So we go from that. We get into plaintiff's work, and you've had a career that's stretching a decade now plus, and how'd you find yourself into the Epstein litigation? Now you're on national news, doing national news interviews, in the thick of it all. So take us into how you kind of got involved in that litigation and what you learned through it all.
Yeah. I have my partner, my old partner, to thank for that, Ted Leopold. When I left Montgomery's office, because Mr. Montgomery was older and he was getting ill, I got a job working with Ed Ricci Sr. and his partner at the time, Ted Leopold. And they graciously took me in, and I started working with them on some pretty high profile cases, very complex product liability cases. Those two guys were masters in their industry. I mean, they definitely knew that field backwards and forwards. So I learned whatever I could from them. And while working there, we had this case just walk through the door. And I think it was Ted's painter, or somehow related to a painter on his home or whatever. And they bring this girl in who had this crazy story about this rich guy on Palm Beach Island that had invited her over there and paid her cash to do illicit massage. And Ted started working on the file, and it got a little bit crazy, and he was busy off doing other things in the product field. So he said, "Do you want to handle this one?" I said, "Sure, I'll take it." So I started working on the case and working it up, and it just snowballed into this monster of, tens of girls that had come forward from Royal Palm Beach High School. And this, super wealthy guy on Palm Beach Island that I came to learn was a guy named Jeffrey Epstein, and lawyers that he was hiring, like Lefkowitz in New York and Dershowitz and Roy Black, and all these huge power players in our industry of law to defend him. And I just, I don't know, I just went for the jugular as best I could, because once I heard the story that my client told me and I believed what she was saying, I just wanted to get him at all costs, whatever I could do.
Yeah, and so that litigation, you know, Epstein or otherwise, is just they're tough cases, these types of cases. So, you know, talk about being able to handle those cases because it does take a special person to handle it. I don't think and believe that every personal injury attorney or every attorney is equipped to handle those types of cases. They're just a different kind of case. So, talk about how that's what you've learned from that kind of litigation, what it's taught you, and how it's really kind of battle tested you.
It takes an emotional toll. You know, I'll never forget after the Epstein case handling um, a case that I'm involved in now that involves 10 young girls who were sexually assaulted and molested by the son of a pastor up in Duluth, Minnesota. And sitting on those calls with those girls day after day, listening to the stories of what had happened to them, it's tough. You walk out of those interviews and just feel emotionally wrecked, especially if you have kids. You know, I've got a son. I don't have a daughter, but I can only imagine what it would be like if I had a daughter. But um, it's still rough having to listen to those stories. But I guess what I do is I try to use it as fuel and just use that after taking a step back and breathing. I turn it into a fire to try to go after the bad guy. And what's great about what I do for a living and why I'm so thankful that I'm in this field is that I really get to go after bad guys. I get to do what we all dream, of doing as a lawyer, which is going to get bad guys. And, being a prosecutor, unfortunately, in this country doesn't pay very well. So I love being able to put guys behind bars, but, I'm equally as happy to make them pay when I know that it makes them hurt, which is in their pocket.
We'll talk about the preparation that it takes because to prepare for a deposition like the ones that you were a part of and been a part of, literally it's consuming. It consumes a lot of you and takes a lot. So talk about the kind of the middle preparation, the discipline it takes
Yeah.
to show up and work.
It's definitely a psychological mind game. You're dealing with generally guys that are narcissists that are very powerful in their own mind, that think they know the answers to everything, that have been manipulating people for their most of their adult lives. So being able to approach that situation to where you can not only learn the history of your client, but also learn the psychology of the person you're cross-examining. And also you have to know a little bit of lie detection. So a lot of the things that I try to learn from are, people in the industry such as FBI interrogators and CIA interrogators, people that are keen to spotting lies and liars and those types of issues. But you also have to know your documents. I mean, even even though it really involves one bad actor usually, or an organization that's allowing that bad actor to do the things that he's doing, um, there are documents that you've got to know like the back of your hand, because the person you're interrogating is going to know those documents better than you, and they're generally going to know their organization better than you. So you have to come into it with a certain mindset of, I'm going to know this information, but then you got to figure out how you're going to use it. And, the trick is, from what I found, is trying to play the person, not the game. So I have to understand the person I'm interrogating first and utilize the tactics I think is going to work on that person, and not necessarily just cookie cutter into every particular witness the same exact line of questions or outline or whatever.
You were DJ in the metal bands at FSU. Did you ever think that your life would take this turn and this is where you'd find yourself?
Absolutely not. No, this is the furthest from whatever I thought I was going to be doing at the end of the day, to be honest. But what's interesting is that I see how I've been able to utilize that past to be able to advocate now for the things that I'm doing. Talking to you, it's really no different than talking to a jury, right? I think of it in the same way, but again, it's no different than me sitting and talking in the radio. I can talk up a radio station about a song. I can talk about a band. I can, do whatever, but you find your voice that way. And then it's how you use that voice and what you do with it later that helps.
So let's talk about, not only are you handling high stakes litigation and doing depositions and representing victims, but you also are a part of a firm that is, a firm that I look up to, and the culture that you've built, the core values that your firm has, the processes, procedures. There's just so much that goes into how great your all's firm runs, and you're a big part of that. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the management of how becoming a manager, managing a bunch of litigation attorneys,
Right.
and how you go about managing a team, as well as still finding the time to handle high profile cases, be on TV, show up for podcasts. Talk about a little bit about that for us.
So managing lawyers, it's like herding cats. It's not easy because you're dealing with egos,
Yeah.
right? But
No, especially personal injury.
oh yeah, big egos, big egos. Everybody wants to whip out their latest verdict and look what I got and look at the millions I got from this jury. But yeah, managing egos is interesting. Um, when I started with Craig about 12 years ago, one of the things that he said to me at the time, because I was on my own, I had left what at that time was Leopold Kuvin and started my own firm down in Delray. And the draw that Craig gave me at the time was, look, all you have to do is work your files. You don't have to do anything else. Just work your files. I go, wow, that sounds like a dream. So he kind of lured me in with that one. And so I started working with him, and that's all I did was work files. And eventually it got to a point where I was like, I think that I could do more here. And I think that this is a good start, but let's build this to something even bigger. So to his credit, Craig has got a great open mind when it comes to business. And he taught me how a law firm isn't just your next case, it's a business. And you've got to learn how to run it like a business. Because if you don't learn how to run it like a business, then you're going to fail as a business. And then if you fail as a business, you fail as a lawyer, right? You can have the greatest, smartest lawyer in the world, but if they don't know how to run their business, they're not going to get any cases. And if you don't get any cases, you can't help anybody. So I saw it as a way to develop that part of me that I think I learned being an economics major. And it's so funny how when you start looking at your life in perspective of how all the little things that you did with your life, how you could use those to better what you are now and to make even better going forward in the future.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because I think it's interesting in personal injury. You get a lot of firms that come together. It's a bunch of partners' names strung together, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody. All these firms run differently. You have management by committee. You have management by one. You have the guys whose one name's on the door, and you have the ones that have a bunch. And then we always see firms break up and leave, and this and that. So how have you and Craig made that work for over a decade now, where it's clear it's Craig's firm, he's the CEO, it's Gold Law, but we know that Gold Law doesn't exist without Spencer Kuvin as well. And so, how have you guys made that work and that relationship work, and how do you guys manage that?
It's been really interesting because when we started, there were a couple of people in town that said this ain't going to work. You got Kuvin with his ego, and you got Craig with his ego and very particular personality. And so it's really funny that it actually has worked and how it's worked so well. I think what Craig did is he realized early on where his forte was in the business, and he realized where my strengths were in the business. And the biggest thing I asked of him was autonomy. I said, look, I will prove to you that I can do what I'm saying I can do. And the minute I stop that, I said, you can come in and do whatever you want, right? But if I continue to prove to you that I can do what I say I'm going to do, then let me keep doing what I'm doing and stay out of it. So to his credit, he has focused on the business. I've focused on the law and the lawyers and developing that part of the operations. And things have grown. And because of that autonomy and allowing me to do me and I allow him to do him, we've grown 20% pretty much every year since I've been there in both revenue and size and productivity and everything. I mean, he went from a firm that, was grossing maybe, a few million a year to now in the tens of millions of dollars. So, together we've worked to build what we have based on the ability to me give him his autonomy to do what he does best, and similarly for him to do that with me.
Talk more a little bit about those lessons that you've learned, because obviously you've been partners in other firms. You did your own thing and had your own firm, and now you've grown something amazing with Craig. And the way you guys have done it, you've scaled in a healthy way and managed to scale up and grow in a very healthy way. So talk more about how that became possible and the lessons that you kind of learned along the way.
So the key is figuring out your metrics, right? In building a business, you've got to understand what your metrics are and how to build that business effectively. And what I think both Craig and I saw over the years from being in the industry, as long as we both had from both perspectives. And I had, he never had defense experience, but I had the defense experience seeing some of these mega firms grow and grow way too fast and just kind of explode. And then I saw some of the plaintiff firms that also just kind of grew haphazardly. um, Craig was a master at figuring out how to make a business run efficiently. And then we looked at the metrics of how many cases we have, what is our revenue, what are our expenses, what are the key performance indicators we want from each one of our lawyers, what are the key performance indicators we want from each one of our case managers and pre-suit. And we started developing these goals. So then once we could prove that each department, each individual who had their own goal set could meet those goals, then we could say, okay, look, once you reach this threshold, we need one more of this or one more of that. So it wasn't a haphazard growth. It was a very well thought out, well planned set of goals that we have to meet. We run our operation in quarters. So, for example, at the end of each quarter of the year, we're assessing whether or not we met the goal that we had set for that quarter. And then if we had, that's great. Now let's move on to next quarter and look at that. And then we also have yearly goals that we're looking at. And for each one of those set of goals, we've set metrics. So how many cases were filed could be a metric. How many mediations were set? Another metric. How many settlements were done? Another metric. How many dispersals of settlements have been happening? That's another metric. And we've fine-tuned those over the years so that they're attainable, but just slightly out of reach, right? So it's a stretch for the lawyers to reach those goals. And then I'll sit and meet with the lawyers every 2 weeks on either in person or by Zoom, and I'll show them what their metrics are. And I'll say, okay, here you are. You got this many, you got that many, you got that. Here's how far you are from your goal. What are you doing to meet that goal this quarter? So it keeps it top of mind. It reminds the lawyers that it's a business and not just your cases. And if you ingrain that in the team, then you're all rowing together to get that goal.
Absolutely. I mean, I love learning from Craig. He's been a great mentor of mine and helped me so much along the way. And to see what you guys have done is an inspiration. But let's talk about kind of how you keep yourself healthy. And, one of the big parts of this is I always like to talk to guests about keeping themselves healthy. And when you're pulled in so many directions, managing attorneys, managing cases, high profile cases, us attorneys don't always tend to take care of ourselves very well. Or business leaders or business owners. So talk a little bit about kind of the health and wellness and how that's a part of your all's culture as well. Because I know there is a lot of health and wellness part of your all's culture.
It's interesting because at the beginning of my career when I was younger, you saw the hard partying, hard drinking plaintiff attorneys. And these were the gunslingers, right? These were the guys you looked up to, where they would go out and go to the bar after work on Friday, and they'd have a bar in the office and be drinking on Fridays and Thursdays or whatever, and smoking cigars. And that's great, but I don't know about you, but if I were to do that now at 55 years old, I'd be on my back the next morning. So I learned over the years that if I want to keep up with the pace of what I demand of myself in a business, I had to get healthy, and I had to make sure that I stayed healthy. So, I'm up at 5:30, 5:45 every morning. I built a gym in my house after the kids went to college. And I work out 3-4 days a week. I run, I try to run 3-4 days a week as best I can to, keep physically active and healthy. We've got a gym in our office. We specifically picked a location here in town that has a gym downstairs on the first floor, and we encourage our employees to do that. We have a wellness program. At our office, we have
Meditation suites.
we have a meditation suite in our office. We do. We've got what we call the celebration room, which is a relaxation room where people can go in and play bumper pool or pinball or a sit down video game, and we encourage it. It's not something that we just kind of have. It's something that we actually promote. In order to promote it, we had a bumper pool tournament, and everyone was involved. I was involved. Craig was involved. All the employees. It was great. So, being able to teach that happiness, wellness, healthy lifestyle, it keeps you going. I got a lawyer that works for me now, Roca. He trained with like the Navy SEALs, I think, at one point. So, one of my other lawyers is a hiker. He's going off for 2 weeks to go hiking in the mountains. So, active people that are incredible. I have a female lawyer, she's a professional dancer, ballroom dancer. Um, these are people that want to believe, that drive themselves and believe that by driving themselves, they can drive their business and drive their practice and help their clients.
Let's talk lastly, I love this profession because of the impact that we can have on not just a single victim's life, but on the system as a whole. And your work through representing victims of sexual abuse and the Epstein type cases is having an impact legislatively as well as in the judicial system.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about that impact and the impact that you hope to make and the legacy that you hope to leave through the work that you've done?
Appreciate it. Yeah, it's been a long road. When I started working on the Epstein cases, for example, it was pre Me Too. This was the era where it was all about blame the victim. What did she do to put herself in that situation? What did she do to encourage the situation? How could she have avoided that situation? And that's where the focus really was until things started turning. And, as an advocate on behalf of victims, you fight that stereotype. So it was through actively fighting that stereotype and going up against some of these really bad people and exposing what they were actually doing on a broad scale that I think that the public image has changed somewhat in the last 10 to 15 years with respect to victims and victim advocacy. So, I've expanded that practice to other claims that really aren't as well known. For example, I've expanded the practice into what's called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which is a federal act that wasn't used a lot before. But as advocates on behalf of victims, we started using that against facilities that allow sex trafficking to occur, such as hotels. And the courts have been behind us in that fight and allowing us to go after facilities like hotels that are permitting these kind of operations to go on without any checks and balances. They're just saying, well, they're paying for a room and they look the other way while men are going in and out of that room 10, 15 a day, and they know what's going on, but they're getting paid to ignore it. So this law helps hold them accountable for that. So hopefully we can change the hotel industry so that they become more attuned to these type of activities and can prevent sex traffickers from utilizing their facilities going forward. So, it's things like that that I think can change the dynamic across the board throughout the United States so that, perpetrators like that have nowhere to go.
Is there any additional changes that you'd like to kind of see come out of the legislature and the court system to help victims and victims' rights?
Um, it's, I think, more of a public perception I'd like to see happen. I think by bringing more of these cases and bringing these things to light, more young women realize that they can talk about it and it's not embarrassing, that people aren't going to blame them. And I think that the more that we can do that and the more that we can actually bring these cases forward, um, the more that the perpetrators will be afraid to do what they've been doing. A lot of these, and I say men because it's primarily, unfortunately, in this realm, men that are abusing young girls. A lot of them feel that they're untouchable, and they feel that way because of the power they hold. Whether it is in Epstein's case, a very powerful billionaire, or whether it's in cases I've handled that involves the clergy, or cases I'm handling now that involves a high-profile doctor in the horse world. they're all powerful men who use that influence to scare these young girls into thinking no one's going to believe them. Why should anyone believe you? You're a 15-year-old. I'm a respectable equine veterinarian, right? But by bringing these cases and bringing this to light, they realize they can speak up. They have a voice. And I think that's the change I'd like to see going forward.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many stories of it. USA Gymnastics, and
Yeah.
what happened with Michigan State, or was it University of Michigan? But it seemed to keep just popping up, and so uh, it's incredible work that you do, and attorneys like you that do the work that it was hopefully will change that. But for those who may not know how to get a hold of you, I think it's important, understanding again, like kind of what I talked about is not all personal injury attorneys are created equal, and not all can handle what you handle. And I know for our firm, when we get these types of cases, we're looking to refer them out to you because we know that you're the expert here. So for those that might be listening, there's a lot of attorneys that listen to this. What's the best way to get a hold of you to refer you a case?
Well, like I told the receptionist at the front desk, just Google me. But yes, it's real easy. All you got to do is put my name into Google. But it's real easy. Just get a hold of Gold Law, and our number isn't hard to forget. It's the 561 and then all twos. So 561-222-2222.
Well, Spencer, I want to thank you for joining me on First Line. I want you to thank you for the advocacy that you do on behalf of victims.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Spencer, thank you deeply for this conversation, for your courage, your rigor, and the clarity you bring to the toughest of matters. This is First Light with Chris Keller. Keep shining your light.